Is the world teetering on the brink of a catastrophe once more? Donald Trump has stirred global tensions by branding Russia a paper tiger and boldly asserting that he could end the war in Ukraine within a week. NATO is now discussing the introduction of an anti-missile system over Ukraine, potentially drawing them into a direct clash with Moscow. Meanwhile, Europe has allocated a staggering €2 billion to produce drones, intending to purchase them back from Ukraine. Amidst this turmoil, scandals erupt within Ukraine, advocating for harsh measures against those avoiding mobilization. Politicians, generals, and propagandists seem to have unleashed a frenzy, steering the world closer to the nuclear precipice. Trump has once again ignited the international conversation. His remarks about Russia and the Ukraine war reverberate like a challenge to Moscow, Europe, and his allies in NATO. He openly labeled Russia a paper tiger, a term that signifies a formidable appearance but reveals impotence upon scrutiny. While China bore this label during the Cold War, it's unprecedented for a sitting U.S. president to confront Putin directly with such disdain. Trump expressed disappointment in Putin, recalling former statements about nuclear threats and submarine capabilities, and proudly proclaimed that America is at least 25 years ahead of Russia and China in nuclear submarine technology. This is more than mere numbers, it's a message aimed at stoking fear while asserting Washington's dominance over the oceans and its nuclear supremacy. Such declarations hit a nerve in the Kremlin, which has long considered its submarines and strategic forces the backbone of its defense. But the startling revelation in Trump's speech? He claims the Ukraine war could be concluded in just 7 days. Imagine 7 days to halt a conflict that has claimed tens of thousands of lives. The pressing question remains, at what cost? Many experts suspect he implies compelling Kyiv into negotiations under Moscow's conditions or presenting a deal to freeze hostilities in exchange for lifting sanctions. This striking portrayal reflects a complex reality. The sitting U.S. president masquerades as a peacemaker yet bares his teeth to all parties involved. His words resonate amid the relentless drone strikes in Kyiv and across Ukraine, evoking memories of his past talks with Putin in Alaska, where they supposedly reached understandings. Yet, as soon as Putin returned to Russia, new attacks began, an indication of Moscow's unreliability as a partner. Trump's characterization of Russia as a paper tiger is not just rhetoric, it highlights Russia's waning influence on both the battlefield and on the global stage. With mounting fears of escalation, Trump's acknowledgement of the heavy toll on the Russian military, including civilian casualties, takes on a mixed tone. While he identifies the tragedy's scale, his vow to end the war in a week raises alarms among many. Could this be a pressure tactic on Kyiv for concessions? The prospect of renewed discussions on mobilization and the future of Ukraine looms larger than ever. In every light, Trump has once again performed his role with flair, throwing a political grenade to the world stage. Now everyone interprets his statements differently. In the Kremlin, silence reigns. In Europe, anxious comments circulate, while Kyiv waits for his bold words to translate into tangible actions. It's clear, Trump's declarations have revived interest in the Ukraine war, making it the top news across global networks. Simultaneously, Western military officials are now discussing the creation of an air defense umbrella over Ukraine to intercept Russian missiles and drones. Initially, it might seem like protection, yet this move risks direct confrontation with Russia. Moscow has repeatedly warned that any attempt by NATO to engage in missile interceptions could push the alliance into the conflict. Advocates argue that British RAF previously intercepted missiles headed for Israel, so aiding Ukraine should be feasible. However, this comparison is naive. Russia is not Hamas or Iran, the stakes are vastly different, and the risk of nuclear escalation is very real. For Kyiv, the air defense initiative represents a chance of survival, whereas for Europe, it's playing with fire. The situation creates a facade of urgency while the reality is marred by corruption, where European taxpayers might end up funding a system shrouded in opacity. As Ukraine openly admits readiness to sell drones, the loop of money flows, Europe invests, Ukraine produces, and in the end, sells back to the same nations. For Ukrainian oligarchs, it's a windfall, for European taxpayers, a double expense. Within this chaotic backdrop, memories of mobilization begin to surface once again. Legislative calls are tightening, and the rhetoric against draft dodgers intensifies, as men in Ukrainian cities are increasingly detained upon receiving mobilization orders. The narrative from authorities is clear: those who refuse to fight are deemed traitors. Yet underneath this call to arms lies hypocrisy. Many who demand mobilization are far removed from the front lines, safely ensconced in offices and studios. This atmosphere breeds a pervasive sense of fear among ordinary Ukrainians. Fear of stepping outside and being swept into military service, unprepared for a fight, and facing potential death without a chance to return. This fear festers, leading people to seek escape routes, from fake certificates to fleeing abroad. Rather than addressing the army's issues and the growing crisis of trust, power brokers opt for intimidation, and pressure tactics prevail. But a mobilization based on fear often breeds rebellion, and each instance of violence from the draft offices only nudges the country closer to an internal explosion. What lies ahead in this unfolding drama? Will the world follow Trump's lead, facing the consequences of his provocative declarations? The future is uncertain, yet it feels alarmingly close. The world finds itself precariously teetering on the brink of chaos. Donald Trump has labeled Russia as a paper tiger, claiming he could end the war in Ukraine in just 1 week. NATO is debating the establishment of a missile defense shield over Ukraine, which suggests direct confrontation with Moscow. Meanwhile, Europe is set to allocate €2 billion for drone production, intending to purchase these drones from Ukraine itself. Amid this brewing storm, scandalous calls resonate within Ukraine, where those avoiding conscription could face hard labor. Politicians, generals, and propagandists seem unleashed, pushing the world towards a nuclear cliff. Trump's thunderous statements have shaken the global agenda once again, issuing a direct challenge not just to Russia but to Europe and even his own NATO allies. He confidently declared Russia a paper tiger, a term that has historically described threats that appear formidable but lack real power. Such boldness is unprecedented, as it echoes the Cold War era when China was similarly labeled. But for an American president to address Vladimir Putin in such terms is a seismic shift. Trump expressed disappointment in Putin, recalling Dmitry Medvedev's nuclear threats and emphasizing America's dominance in nuclear capabilities over Russia and China. This isn't merely about a military ratio, it's a political declaration, showcasing Washington's readiness to control global waters and maintain nuclear superiority. For the Kremlin, these words strike hard, as submarines and strategic forces have always formed the bedrock of its defense. The most explosive claim from Trump is his assertion that he could dissolve the war within a week, 7 days, that could turn a conflict responsible for countless lives lost into mere history. The only question left is at what cost? Many analysts speculate that this likely pertains to pressuring Kyiv into negotiations under Moscow's terms or possibly offering to freeze the war in exchange for lifted sanctions. This paints a dramatic picture where the US president plays the role of peacemaker while revealing his teeth to all involved parties. With drones constantly hammering Kyiv and other Ukrainian cities, Trump's words resonate ominously. He reminded the audience of a previous meeting with Putin in Alaska, suggesting all was agreed upon, yet once Putin returned home, fresh attacks ensued. This tactic signifies a blatant display of Moscow's shortcomings as a negotiating partner while justifying future actions. Trump's paper tiger declaration serves a dual purpose, not just to illustrate Russia's falling status on the front lines, but also to undermine its global superpower reputation. If your main adversary publicly diminishes you, allies begin to waver in their confidence, while enemies become emboldened. Yet for Ukraine, this rhetoric is bittersweet. Trump openly acknowledges the immense toll the Russian army has taken, including civilian casualties, a stark depiction of tragedy. Yet, his promise to end the war in just a week instills unease, as it hints at pressure on Kyiv for concessions which could spark new debates over mobilization, escalating losses, and the future of Ukraine. Yet again, Trump has tossed a figurative grenade into the fabric of world politics, leaving his words open to interpretation by all. In the Kremlin, silence reigns. In Europe, anxious discussions abound while Kyiv braces for significant actions to follow such thunderous declarations. One fact stands clear: following Trump's assertions, the war in Ukraine has once again dominated global news channels, causing discussions about scenarios yesterday deemed impossible to become a looming reality. In the previous part, we saw the unsettling calm following Donald Trump's provocative remarks about Russia and Ukraine, as concerns began to swirl in Europe. The realization dawned that, once again, the conflict in Ukraine has become the focal point of global discussions, with strategies previously deemed improbable now being entertained. Recent conversations among senior Western military officials have centered on the establishment of a defensive umbrella over Ukraine. This initiative aims to intercept Russian missiles and drones, starting with western regions and reaching toward Kyiv. At a glance, this appears to be a protective measure. However, beneath the surface lies a precarious step towards direct confrontation with Russia. Moscow has warned repeatedly that any NATO attempt to shoot down Russian missiles would be viewed as an act of war. Supporters liken this to past instances when British forces intercepted Iranian missiles headed for Israel, believing it could similarly apply to assisting Ukraine. Yet, this comparison lacks depth. Russia is not Hamas or Iran. The stakes are vastly different, and the specter of nuclear escalation looms ominously. For Kiev, this defensive shield signifies a possible lifeline. For Europe, it resembles a perilous game of fire. For Moscow, it provides grounds to threaten NATO with war. This paradox creates a precarious situation. The more the West bolsters Ukraine's defenses, the closer we edge toward a direct conflict between nuclear powers. Meanwhile, the European Union has allocated €2 billion to Ukraine for drone production. While this appears like vital assistance, in reality, it presents an ironic twist. Ukraine is openly preparing to export the very weapons and drones funded by Europe. Thus, Europe invests funds, Ukraine manufactures drones, and then sells them back to the same EU nations. It's a cycle of dependency, providing for Ukraine while benefiting oligarchs who profit from these transactions, all while European taxpayers somehow foot the bill twice, first for investments, then for the final products. For Ukraine, this funding underscores an opportunity to bolster its military-industrial complex and assert its independence. Yet for Europe, it raises red flags about pouring money into a system often riddled with corruption. It begs the important question, is this truly assistance in a time of war, or just another convoluted scheme? The continent has been jolted into alarm once more after reports emerged of drones detected flying over Denmark. Almost instantly, speculation about a potential Russian provocation surfaced within the media, flooding headlines with claims of thousands of drones in the sky. The landscape of conflict grows darker, as whispers of war become shouts. In Europe, panic spreads like wildfire with reports of drones spotted in the sky over Denmark. The media reels with sensational claims, painting a picture of countless aerial threats, yet in reality, only a handful were seen, some merely equipped with ordinary LED lights, not military machines at all. But in a world saturated with fear, the absurd becomes reality. Denmark invests millions into a defensive system, tying up air traffic controllers and insisting Ukrainian military personnel provide training despite the triviality of the threat. NATO finds itself stretched thin, unable to tackle even what seem like toy drones without assistance from Kiev. One must ponder, why would Moscow provoke Copenhagen when there is no strategic gain at stake? The answer lies buried beneath the panic. The louder the cries about Russian drones become, the easier it is to justify military expenditures and the expansion of military presence across Europe. The drones, rather than a threat, take the shape of tools for escalating tensions and amplifying fear. As Europe teeters on the edge of conflict, Ukraine finds itself facing the stark shadows of mobilization once again. New legislation tightens the grip, with shouts for a total crackdown on draft dodgers filling the air. Streets in Kiev and other cities echo with the sounds of men being apprehended, summons thrust into their hands on the spot. The authorities' rhetoric is simple: anyone who refuses to serve is a traitor. Yet beneath this surface lies a painful hypocrisy. Many clamoring for mobilization haven't seen a day at the front. They demand that the so-called cowards face the trenches, all while remaining comfortably ensconced in their offices and studios. This creates an atmosphere of constant dread for ordinary Ukrainians. Fear of stepping outside, of being swept into the draft, of finding oneself in war with no training and no hope of returning. It's a recipe for internal destruction. People begin to seek any means of escape, fraudulent documents, flights to safety across borders. Rather than addressing the military's challenges and the crisis of trust, the powers that be choose a path of intimidation and repression. A system built on fear can only lead to rebellion. Each new instance of violence from recruitment officers pushes the nation closer to the edge of an internal explosion. As tensions simmer, one raises an unsettling question: how long before the fear starts to boil over? The very foundation of society feels as if it's teetering on the brink, where trust is elusive and hope fades into despair.